host, Jill Cody, and our program today is Corporate BS. From praising the health benefits of cigarettes to moralizing on the character-building qualities of child labor, rich corporate overlords have gone to astonishing, often morally indefensible lengths to defend their profits. Since the dawn of capitalism, they've told the same lies over and over to explain why their bottom line is always more important than the greater good. You say you want to raise the federal minimum wage? Why? You'll only make things worse for the very people you want to help. Should we hold polluters accountable for the toxins they're dumping in our air and water? No, the free market will save us. It's always the same tired threats and finger-pointing in a concentrated campaign to keep wealth and power in the hands of the wealthy and powerful. We have big things to do. Our interview guest today is a renowned author and advocate, Donald Cohen. Mr. Cohen is the founder and executive director of the Research and Policy Center in the Public Interest. Donald is the co-author of The Privatization of Everything and is the co-author with billionaire Nick Hanauer and journalist Joan Walsh of Corporate BS, exposing lies and half-truths that protect profit, power, and the wealth in America. Welcome to Be Bold America, Donald.
Thank you so much for having me, Jill.
Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you fine.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So do you like to go by Don or Donald?
I go by both, either way.
Good. All right. Well, before we dive into the murky waters of corporate propaganda, would you please start by sharing with us how the three of you got together to write this book and give us a brief overview of what corporate propaganda looks like today?
Sure. It's a long story. So I, about 8 years ago, or maybe 9, I had done a great deal of research on, looking for quotes. I was looking for quotes of what corporations said and politicians and, and others would say would happen when the things that we take for granted today were being considered. In other words, when Social Security was being considered and during the New Deal, when the minimum wage in that period as well, and subsequently the Clean Air Act. And the reason I started to look back at that is because, in efforts of things that I was involved with in California, I live in California, increasing the minimum wage, expanding healthcare coverage, we heard these same arguments over and over again, and I wondered if they said the same things. Well, they've always been the same things. So I did a bunch of research, looked into the archives and congressional record and all sorts of places, and found, several thousand quotes. So, and then, I had a project at that time called the Cry Wolf Project, which was essentially, publicizing these quotes and what they said. Nick Hanauer had, turned out, we knew a number of people in common. It turned out he had the same idea, and someone connected us, and we decided, this was a number of years ago now, let's pursue this together in some fashion. And, I don't know, a year or two ago, we decided let's do a book, and then we found Joan, who, we knew of her work, and we decided to, and then New Press, the publisher, decided that it was, liked the idea, and we decided to go for it. To your second question, which is, the purpose of the book, the thesis of the book is the quotes that I had found and the additional research that we had done with even more, turned into, after some analysis, what we found is that there are the 6 storylines or lies or, what have you, that we hear over and over again. So we organized the book that way. Along these 6 storylines, and we've heard all of them since the end of child labor, since the end of slavery, since, healthy food in the early part of the 20th century and beyond. We hear the same 6 arguments over and over again.
Like trends.
Like trends, but I wouldn't say trends because they're purposeful. Because these are purposeful. These are propaganda.
Interesting.
So it's someone who says, if we call increasing the minimum wage a job killer, we may be able to prevent its passage. So it's these are intentional arguments and intentional propaganda.
You discuss the deceptive practices of corporations. Can you share some striking examples?
Sure. Well, So I like to talk about lead. So, the first storyline in the book is in the 6 storylines is, it's not a problem. We all know, smoking doesn't cause cancer. It's not addictive. We don't know that. So lead, which was used in paint, was used in, ultimately in gasoline and many other things. The lead industries, the National Lead Company, and other, other big corporations, since the early part of the 20th century, kept saying over and over again, not only is lead not bad for you, lead in paint at the time, it's actually good for your health.
Oh my!
And so, and as early, and they had, I don't remember exactly the year, but in the early part of the 20th century, they had scientific evidence knowing that was false. Now, ultimately, it took about 70 years for us to get rid of paint out of lead, to get paint out of gasoline. And so them denying, we're denying the health impacts of lead, it had, a lot of impact on a lot of people's lives. This isn't just argumentation. This isn't just propaganda. This is propaganda that, that causes damage to people.
Starting with the first of the 6 propaganda messaging, it's not a problem. Do you have another example you wanted to share there? The next one was the free market knows best, but it's not a problem seems to be the first one.
It's the first step. Well, we all know climate change not a problem. It doesn't exist.
Yeah,
right?
not a problem.
So that's what we're dealing with. Smoking. It's it doesn't cause cancer. It's not a problem.
Not a problem.
Child labor. There's a quote in the book that says, "I've seen children working in factories and I've seen them working at home and they were perfectly happy." That was in 1913. It's not a problem. Why do you want to ban child labor? Over and over again.
So next is the free market knows best.
We hear that in lots of ways, right?
Yes.
If workplaces are unsafe, well, then people will not want to work there. That's the market. That's the labor market at work. If if businesses create unhealthy or dangerous products, then people won't buy them, right? So the market, the individuals choosing their jobs, what they purchase or consume, will in fact solve all problems. Now, the problem with that is it's not true. It doesn't.
Right. Didn't Vice President George H.W. Bush call it voodoo economics?
Yeah, exactly. There was some voodoo in there, but it's like I'll give you a couple. It's always good to give some examples.
Yeah.
Medicare was passed in 1965. Covers health care for folks over 65 plus others with some disabilities. And this is from a life insurance company. A leader of a life insurance company said Medicaid would set up a health care program which served little or no necessary social purpose and would be a direct, unwarranted, and completely unfair intrusion in private enterprise. In other words, let the market, if people want to have health care after they're 65, then the market will take care of it. People can buy it. If they don't want it, then they don't have to buy it. Now we know, of course, that everybody needs it. So, but that's one example. Let me think of another one. The subprime mortgage market. When in the 2000, 2008,
right.
when the economy crashed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is a quote from someone from the Cato Institute. The prime mortgage market, which makes funds available to borrowers with impaired credit or little or no credit history, offers a good example of competition at work, right? Competition is the fundamental of the market, right? That players will compete with one another, bring prices down, bring quality up. People will choose the winners and reject the losers. Well, that didn't turn out so good either. The economy tanked.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you see is, what they're saying is competition in a free market will solve all problems. And it doesn't get everybody health care. It doesn't get everybody a home. It doesn't create necessarily safe workplaces. It allows companies to discriminate because it's their choice in the free market to discriminate, prevent, African Americans from sitting at a lunch counter, all the same.
I know in the book it said that these deceptive corporate propaganda has been going on for centuries, but it seems like it really started earnestly maybe in the 1940s with a handful of conservative economists that thought they'd bring peace and prosperity to the entire world through this magical thing they dubbed the free market. And then it really got on a roll about 42 years ago with Ronald Reagan. What do you think Reagan's role was in creating this free market is a god? It's almost a theology, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think, his fundamental role was to say government is not the solution to the things that we all, the problems we need to solve, the things that we need to make sure everybody has, that government's not the solution. And if that's the case, what is the solution? Well, it's the market. That's, I know people that are true believers. They believe the market is a better instrument than democracy to decide, to deliver and distribute goods and services of all kinds. They're absolutely wrong because markets exclude people. You don't have money, you can't participate in the market. Which means you don't have money, you don't get health care, or you do get health care and you get saddled with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. So the market is just the wrong tool for the things that we all need. But Reagan really, launched a multi-decade effort against the idea that there are things we have to do together, and that means we have to do them through government institutions. Right,
the common good. Well, it was my understanding that Reaganomics has transferred $51 trillion from the pockets of America's working class right into the pockets of what I call the disgustingly rich. And it just exploded inequality and crushed the single worker family single worker to raise a family.
That's right.
This free market idea. I don't know why people still think it's something we need to believe in, because it's just an amorphous. And even be in the market, you have to have some money.
Well, the thing is, there's no such thing as a free market. A market, we
right.
go to the store. We go to the store and buy things, right? And we go to markets, right? People buy and sell things that we all use. Markets are legitimate things, okay? So the question is how we structure those markets, what the standards are, what the rules are. I mean, you can't pay somebody, a totally free market would mean you could pay somebody, $1 an hour if they're willing to work for $1 an hour. No, we structured the market so that that's not acceptable, that's not okay. So markets are human creations. The only question is who writes the rules? Right. Well, this is a good time to take a break. You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7, 89.5, 89.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the ksqd.org website. Our topic today is corporate BS, and I wanted to say that the BS part on the book is really Bull, SH*T. And I'm speaking with Donald Cohen, founder and executive director of In the Public Interest, and the co-author of Corporate BS, Exposing Lies and Half-Truths That Protect Profit, Power, and Wealth in America. Also, learn more about Donald at inthepublicinterest.org. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, your host for Progressive Talk on K-Squid, 90.7 FM, community radio for the Central Coast, 4 p.m. weekdays. KSQD is a vital media resource for listeners in Santa Cruz and Monterey counties and worldwide on the web. Please help support this station by making a contribution to keep the station thriving. Go to ksqd.org and give what you can to help keep shows like mine coming to you daily at 90.7 FM. With 6 large corporations owning most of the media, it's essential that listeners support grassroots, locally run radio stations like KSQD. Community radio is responsive to its listeners and isn't afraid to challenge the status quo. Please join me, Tom Hartman, in supporting K-Squid, 90.7 FM, community radio for the Central Coast, by making your pledge today online at ksqd.org. That's 90.7 FM, K-Squid. Catch me right here at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you, and tag you're it.
And we're back. This live Be Bold America show is edited into a podcast that's available for free on Apple, Google, Spotify, and many other podcast platforms, including YouTube and on the KSQD website. Please follow our podcast and share it with a friend. That's how our show grows. And I am delighted to say that our podcast listenership increased 213% in 2023 and is now heard in 10 countries. Thank you to all of you worldwide for your support, and keep spreading the word. That is how this program grows, and we'll be discussing wide-ranging topics on democracy, the climate crisis, principle-centered living, and we value truth above all else. So, Donald, we've gone through the 2 of the 6 key propaganda messaging. It's not a problem. The free market knows best. And then the third was, it's not our fault. Tell us about that one.
Corporations, who create unsafe workplaces or products that poison or what have you, say, well, that's not our fault, that's somebody else's fault. Yes, it's a problem, but it isn't our fault, therefore not our responsibility. So, for example, smoking, right? Well, it's not our fault if we put a label on the side of the cigarette pack. That's not our fault if people are dying or get from lung cancer. As an example that we're all familiar with. And so again, we hear that shifting of responsibility. So again, it's always good. I like to give examples. So I mentioned lead earlier. So in 1950. Lead industry spokesman was, at this point it's becoming clear that there's a problem with lead. So the quote goes, the only seemingly feasible means of coping with childhood plumbism, which is lead poisoning, the problem is that of parental education. In other words, it's the parents' fault for letting the kids play with toys that are made with lead or eat paint chips, or eat a paint chip that fell on the floor. It's the parents' problem. So again, they know that lead is poisonous. They finally have had to admit that it's a problem, so they're past, argument 1. But they're saying, but not Teg. It's not us, Teg. You're the problem here. There's one example I'll give, which makes it very clear, though, that this is intentional propaganda, strategic and intentional. So the opioid crisis, right? We're all familiar with the opioid crisis.
Yes.
And it's very clear that there were real people responsible for addicting, hundreds of thousands of people in losing lots of lives through overdose. So the Sacklers, the Sackler family that owned Purdue Pharma, were kind of the primary folks behind it, responsible for it, profiting from it. And what Richard Sackler said, he said, we have to hammer on the abusers, the opioid abusers, in every way possible. They are the culprits and the problem. They are reckless criminals. So in other words,
wow.
The Sacklers did all sorts of manipulative advertising and changing of the recommended dosage to make it easier for people to get addicted and all that. This was a strategy of sales. But as it became clear that there was a problem, they said, well, that's not our problem. That was because people, the addicts are addicts. They can't control themselves. This is their problem. So again, all of these things have human consequence, and it's purposeful. It's purposeful because they want to make money, selling their product.
Well, people that listen to this show have heard me to say this many times, which is they talk about corporations being a person. Mitt Romney's saying, corporations are people, my friend. And I'd say if a corporation's a person, they'd be a psychopath because they don't have, as a corporation, empathy, humility, or compassion. Maybe the individuals in the corporation do. But when they come together, like Enron knowing about the fossil fuel damaging our climate in the 70s, but decided to just ignore that and keep pumping, and here we are with the results, or what you were speaking about. It's really psychopathic, right?
Yeah, I always think about corporations in a very particular way. Companies just do one thing. They sell stuff, right? So what do they want? They want to sell as many as possible. They want to produce it as cheaply and still produce it as possible. They want to make as much profit as possible. They want to sell the individual thing, whatever it is, for the highest cost possible, and they want to have the biggest market share possible. They want to grow. So that's all they do. They're amoral institutions. whose one purpose is to sell stuff. Now, that's on its face. There's nothing wrong with that. We all buy stuff, but it's really important to understand what their purpose is and what their interests are, right? So they, and sometimes it might be in our interest for them to sell stuff. We need to get stuff, but it has to be, regulated and all of that. But it may not be in our interest for them to sell stuff. It's not in their interest to sell lots and lots of opioids, of oxy. Mm-hmm. It's not in our interest to sell poisonous food or unhealthy paint or any of that. It's really not. But all of their incentives are to sell more because that's all they're about. They're looking at one number.
Mm-hmm. You reminded me of something that I heard Tom Hartman talk about recently, which is going back to tax corporations again at 50%, as it was under President Eisenhower. Not that the government would get all that revenue, but that the corporations would want to put it back into the company and employees so they didn't have to pay the taxes to the government. And then it built better products and treated employees better.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you run a company, again, let's go back to sell. I'll go back to the same things I said earlier. Sell as many as possible, make it as cheaply as possible, and for highest price as possible. Now, you could say we're going to sell it as cheaply as possible. I mean, we're going to produce it as cheaply as possible, but we're not going to do it in a way that causes workers not to be able to have, afford a home or health care. Right, because that's not in our common interest for that to happen. Right, we need everyone to have health care. We need everyone to have a good job. We need everyone to have a home and all those things. So that could be a decision that a company makes, but unfortunately, the incentives is there's too many companies. I'm not going to say every one of them, but there's too many companies saying, well, that's the free market determines. We'll go back to that. Mm-hmm. What we should pay. Mm-hmm. Not the basic standards that we should decide as a country that everyone should operate with.
I guess I'm still struggling with the idea that yes, corporations are amoral institutions. They're a paper construct. We create them, but yet they can become immoral institutions. And I go back to what Enron did and knew about with their own product, that it was destroying the climate. And they hid that, or the same with the corporations. It became immoral. Or, the companies, when you say make an item more cheaply, that meant moving everything off to China. And so now we've got our drugs made in China and our chips were made, the silicon chip, so much offshored because it was cheaper for the corporation. And yet with the pandemic, really showed us that we don't make anything here anymore, and we got to bring stuff home. So I'm wondering when an amoral corporation really becomes an immoral institution.
Well, amoral doesn't mean they're good.
Okay, all right.
Amoral means morality doesn't fit into their. Morality doesn't fit in their construct because of their want to sell stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Right? They'll sell it bad, they'll sell it good, whatever's going to make them more money, because that's what they do. Unfortunately, because of markets and because of the lack of regulations in many places, that we need and other things, it's a race to the bottom, and a race to the bottom is hurts people. Mm-hmm. Means we don't have health care. Means we don't have jobs. Means they deny the problems of fossil fuels. That's the race to the bottom, using all of the tools of the tools of the trade that are in this book. So amoral does not imply that the opposite of amoral is not immoral or moral.
Or moral.
It's lacking morality.
Thank you. Well, your a fourth propaganda message we've done. It's not our problem. The free market knows best. It's not our fault. It's your fault. It's a job killer. Talk about that. It's a job killer.
Well, I mean, this is so common. Every time when I was several years ago, I was working on wage issues, with living wage and minimum wage and a variety of things like that, and or expanding health care. This is in California, and every time, I mean, you're based in California, so the California Chamber of Commerce I think they started in the late 90s, each year produced a hit list that they would call the job killer bills. Right, if you increase the minimum wage, there was always a bunch of them, or things that expanded, family medical leave and environmental regulation, anything that would impose costs on business were a job killer. So if we raise the minimum wage, people are going to lose their job, right? So but this is not new. That's the thing. Job killer became a term in the late 90s. It became, you can Google job killer, you find it a lot. But the idea was common all the way, 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 way back. So here's a couple of examples. Let's see. The Clean Air Act, this is in 1970. There was the Clean Air Act could prevent continued production of automobiles and is a threat to the entire American economy and to every person in America. In other words, the Clean Air Act that would require, mileage standards and other, and catalytic converters and things like that to reduce smog-inducing emissions, that would kill the economy because if there's no production of automobiles, there's no jobs, right? Another one I go to a lot, and actually later another version of the Clean Air Act in 1990 there was an update of the Clean Air Act. This was when we were all talking about ozone and CFCs and things like that. So the DuPont Corporation, which is a chemical corporation, the spokesperson said of the 1990 Clean Air Act that was going to eliminate these ozone depleting chemicals. He said entire industries could fold. I'll go back to the 1970 Clean Air Act. It should have been in order here, but it's like Lee Iacocca was the CEO of the Ford Motor Company at the time. This bill could prevent. Oh wait, I already read that. That's why it's double on the page.
I've never done that.
Yeah, exactly. And then listen, I live in Los Angeles. The Clean Air Act had an enormous impact. The air's much cleaner. Nobody wants to repeal the Clean Air Act. The Americans for Disabilities Act. This was passed, I think, in 1990. Now we have ramps on the ends of, on sidewalks and street corners, and we have all sorts of rules that make people with disabilities, give them access to everything we all have access to. The rest of us have access to. So, let's see. The National Review, which is a conservative journal, said, under the guise of civil rights for the disabled, the Senate has passed a disaster for U.S. business. Because U.S. business is going to have to make accommodations for people in wheelchairs. People who are citizens and who deserve the same rights and access to all of it, and that everyone does. Mm-hmm. So, and the other thing about the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is nobody would repeal it at this point. It didn't destroy. It was not a disaster for U.S. business, by the way. More people had access. More people could get into stores and hotels and airplanes and all of that. In fact, the thing about all these quotes and all these things is none of this stuff happened. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. None of it, and everything that they said something about was passed into law or new regulation, and is widely embraced today as just common sense. Of course, we would have that. We always have, haven't we?
Right, and just normal in our everyday life. You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7, 89.5, and 89.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the ksqd.org website. Our topic today is corporate BS, and we're speaking with Donald Cohen, who co-authored with billionaire Nick Hanauer and journalist Joan Walsh, Corporate BS, Exposing Lies and Half-Truths that Protect Profit, Power, and Wealth in America. We will be right back after Jim Hightower's commentary titled Big Oil's Slick Attempt to Greenwash Its Massive Plastic Pollution. And listen for Big Oil's lie, because it relates to today's topic about a deceitful term, advanced recycling.
Let's all sing the holiday classic, All I Want for Christmas is Something Not Made of Plastic. Easier sung than done. Plastic is now ubiquitous in toys, electronics, tools, air, water, and us. And don't forget the plastic baby Jesus in Christmas tableaus. What is plastic anyway? It's a toxic synthetic material mostly manufactured from petroleum by such giants as ExxonMobil, the globe's top purveyor. So much is produced by these profiteers that plastic trash is now a planetary disaster. But not to worry, for big oil's lobbyists assure us gabillions of plastic bags, bottles, and such are being recycled, keeping them out of our landfills, water, bodies, etc. Swell! Except they're lying. After all, Exxon is the same for-profit contaminator that lied for years that fossil fuels were not causing climate change, even though top executives knew they were. Their ethic of deceit continues today. Big Oil knows that 94% of U.S. plastics are not recycled. Indeed, they can't be. Faced with growing public alarm about the ever-growing glut of plastic pollution, the industry has doubled down on deceit by offering a snappy new PR slogan, Advanced Recycling. They say it's a magical process dubbed pyrolysis. Only it doesn't work. It's expensive and it increases climate change emissions. Still, Exxon exclaims that it will soon be processing 500,000 tons of plastic waste. But that's not even a drop in the plastic bucket, for more than 400 million tons of plastic waste is discarded each year, and the oil industry is planning to double plastic production by 2040. This is Jim Hightower saying the only real way to stop plastic pollution is to use less plastic. To learn more and help, go to beyondplastics.org. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you subscribers to Jim Hightower's Lowdown on Substack. Find us at jimhightower.substack.com. Let's all sing the holiday.
Remember, this is live radio. If you are just joining us, our topic today is corporate BS, and our bold interview guest is Donald Cohen, founder and executive director of In the Public Interest. Now, Don, in the commentary, Jim Hightower mentioned Big Oil's lie about advanced recycling. After hearing this, did any thoughts or reaction come to mind, especially how it relates to corporate BS?
No, I am equally obsessed with plastic in our household. I recall when their efforts to ban plastic bags, grocery bags.
Right.
You hear these. I don't remember exactly what it was. I remember in California there was some laws passed, may have been passed. I think they were ultimately, but the same arguments, absolutely the same arguments. So every effort to limit the use of plastic packaging and all that. At the local level, state level, national level, you would hear the same thing. I don't have a catalog of it, but I can tell you it's a fact.
It's the same formula.
It's the same formula because they don't. If you ban the sale of a certain kind of plastic, someone's not going to be able to sell their product. And if they have to sell their product, and all they do is sell their product, that's their 100% their entire purpose. So they will do whatever it takes to prevent someone from to stop that from happening. That and so plastic is poisoning the planet.
And our brains, they're finding it in our brains, the microplastic in our bodies and our brains.
That's right. Well, and the other thing is, and if people would just recycle, it's not our fault, right?
Right.
It's not our fault. If people would just recycle, it'd be fine. Never mind that the recycling is a hoax. Much of the recycling is a hoax.
94% isn't recycled.
That's exactly. And so it's all, this is sleight of hand. They have we're the problem because we're not recycling. It's not a problem because we are, it's not a problem because we can just recycle it, right? But if it's not being recycled, it's not our fault. You got to go through the arguments, right? And if you do that, you're going to destroy the economy because what will happen to the things we put in plastic? Food will go spoiled. I mean, once you start paying attention to these debates, you see all the arguments. I mean, you open the paper tomorrow, and people who are listening to this or read the book. I see it every day in the newspaper on one issue or another. They'll start, and that's the purpose of us writing the book is to say, wait a second, this is a game plan. If you first thing we have to do is become aware of the game plan, and then we go, oh yeah, it's a game.
And you can start seeing the formula in the propaganda messaging. I wanted to also say this is a beautifully published book, a gift worthy. It's not your standard. Print. It's very nicely done. So now, and I repeat these because I want people to learn 1, it's not a problem. 2, the free market knows best. 3, it's not our fault, it's your fault. 4, it's a job killer. Now we're on to 5. You'll only make it worse. Tell us about that.
Right. So minimum wage, you'll hear, well, if you raise the minimum wage, then every black teenager is going to lose their job. And what you're really about is social justice and economic justice. And so you're really going to make it worse for them. This is an argument I've heard many, many times. Even Milton Friedman said in 1973 on that subject, I've often said that minimum wage rate is the most anti-Negro law on the books. I don't really think Milton Friedman cared about black people called Negroes at the time. I don't think, right? But I want to give an example that's just so outrageous, it's hilarious. And this is about women's suffrage in 1901. Women didn't get the right to vote until 1920, right? So, the campaign to get the right to vote started in 1848 at Seneca Falls, right? I think is that what it was?
I think so too.
Yeah. So here's a quote from a guy named Henry Frick, who was a writer, conservative writer, and he says, it's a little bit long, but stay with me. Women's participation in political life would involve the domestic calamity of a deserted home and the loss of the womanly qualities for which refined men adore women and marry them. Doctors tell us, too, that thousands of children would be harmed or killed before birth by the injurious effect of untimely political excitement on their mothers. Okay.
Wow.
It's outlandish.
I shouldn't laugh.
It's hilarious, but it's not different. But it's not different,
right?
From saying, here's, Medicare, which I've talked about. Medicare, we think, why did we pass Medicare at 65? Because so everybody over 65, people retired, deserve to have health care. It's, we should be all right. So this is from a congressman from Wyoming. He said in 65, around the time that it passed, Medicare could destroy private initiative for our aged to protect themselves with insurance against the cost of illness. In other words, if you give it to them for free, they'll get lazy and they won't pursue their own health. So you're going to make them less healthy.
Wow, you have to, that's a real, you have to be a pretzel logic there.
That's exactly right. And so, again, slavery, because it shows you how far we go back. This goes 1832. We cannot rid slavery. We cannot get rid of slavery without producing a greater injury to both masters and slaves. It'll make it worse.
Wow. And then number 6, the 6th key propaganda messaging is, it's socialism.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to save that for last because, we still hear that every day, right?
We do, yes. And I also want to point out that a lot of industries want to privatize the profits and socialize the expenses.
Yeah, exactly right. That's right. So I mean, since we've been hearing it forever, we continue to hear it, socialism, regardless of the fact that it's not, right? So family medical leave passed in the 80s, or ultimately passed in the late 80s, I think. At the federal level. This disturbing trend is nothing short of Europeanization, a polite term for socialism, right? For basically saying that employers should provide family leave for a worker that has a baby or dealing with a sick parent or what have you. Medicare is socialism. That's another one. Oh, here's one by your friend Ronald Reagan. I know you're close to him. He was a spokesperson for the American Medical Association in the early 60s.
I remember that.
As a job. And he said, if Medicare passes, he says, one of these days you and I are going to spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was like in America when men were free. I don't know about you, but I actually, I have Medicare. I'm older than 65. I feel a lot freer knowing that I can go to the doctor and not worry about it. That's freedom.
Well, I don't know who said it. Someone's famous, but I can't remember the name now, said, a necessitous man is not a free man. So if you need health care,
Yeah.
You're not free. If you need money, and you're poor, you're not free.
That's right. That's right. Well, that gets at the larger, the most fundamental debate about society, right? Conservatives, libertarians, the greedy say, well, everybody's on their own, and you either make it or you don't, right? And that's real freedom. I should be able to do whatever I want, no matter what. I should be able to not get vaccinated or not wear a mask. Well, that's true technically. But also that if you're not, when this, during the pandemic, when people aren't masked and people aren't, getting vaccinated, it wasn't just about your health; it was about our health too, right? So freedom means everybody gets, you have to. It means freedom means you're healthy, you're secure, you have options and opportunities, and that's not the case if you're in poverty, you don't have health care, you're being poisoned by emissions in the air or the planet, by the way, it's under threat as well. So
you brought up the word greed, and I did want to ask, because I've heard the term greedflation, and I do know that the pandemic, there were supply chain issues, products couldn't be gotten, the prices went up because of the supply and demand. But also there was greedflation during that time, that companies could raise profits just because they could, taking advantage of the pandemic. And so do you have any ideas on what lies were or are still being told to keep their profits up with the greedflation that happened?
Well, they go back to the market, right? I mean, even just how you described it, supply and demand. If there's less of something, it didn't necessarily cost more to make.
Right.
Right? So they say, because if there's more demand for less supply, then people will pay more for something. Okay, there's truth in that. But it's also not because the cost of doing business went up. It's because it's the opportunity.
Exactly.
So that's what the market, right? And we need it. We need security. We need everything. They took it in a market-based economy. They took advantage of that to suck down, to really grab as much cash as they possibly could. They used a lot of that cash for stock buybacks, not to invest. They used it for other things. And so this is just an opportunity in the free market when supply and demand and when you could raise more, when you could raise prices because people wanted it. Taking advantage of the fact that there's less supply to make more money.
Then we're still on it's socialism, the socialist plot. And I just wanted to point out that just because the word has social in it doesn't mean it's socialism, like Social Security. And I think people get confused because that word social happens to be in the title or that they call it socialism. But socialism is where the state or our government owns the product or the service and then reaps the profit from it. That doesn't happen in Social Security. We pay into it, and it's held in trust by the government for the future and for payouts. So this socialism has really been manipulated as a propaganda message an awful lot, right?
Absolutely. Well, in many cases, we're talking about social democracy.
Right.
In my view, highly regulated markets to make sure that basic public goods, things that we all need, we need everyone to have, can be created by private entities. But we have adequate regulation, we have adequate resources to make sure everybody's got them, right? And we don't we don't allow price gouging, we don't allow cutting corners in ways that work against those things. So Britain is not a socialist country, but it has medicine. I mean, think about the word socialism. I mean, think about this: if everyone needs health care, which we believe everyone does, right? Then the only question is how you pay for it. And then there's only a couple of ways to pay for things. You could pay through premiums, insurance premiums. You could pay through individually. In other words, you go to the doctor, you pay for that visit, or you could pay through taxes, right? Those are the only options. Now, what I think is sort of social democracy said, well, some things that are really should not be market commodities, like healthcare and others, we should pay through taxes, right? Because that means it's a collective responsibility that everyone needs it. Everyone needs healthcare therefore it's a collective responsibility, and the way we take care of collective responsibilities is through taxation and spending in that way. But it's so is that socialism? It's socialized paying for things, right? Even a single payer, even Medicare for all, will have private doctors. So we'll decide to pay for it through the instruments of democracy and public institutions.
And I guess that's what we talk about with democratic commons, because I don't want the government to make my jeans or my cars, but I'd certainly like the government to be interested in the air and water I breathe and drink, things that are common to all of us.
That's right.
And that leads me to, and right after the break, I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about your book, Privatization of Everything, because that leads right into it. I am speaking with our bold interview guest, Donald Cohen, founder and executive director of In the Public Interest, and who co-authored with billionaire Nick Hanauer and journalist Joan Walsh, Corporate BS, Exposing Lies and Half-Truths That Protect Profit, Power, and Wealth in America. You are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Many Voices, One Station. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
Join KSQD this evening at 6 for Tackling the Taboo Sunday Dinner. Mark Gardner welcomes guests from the Triangle Speakers at Santa Cruz Diversity Center. They educate the public about what it means to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer, transgender, or related identities, or an ally of LGBTQ plus people. Hear basic facts and true-life experiences about sexual orientation and gender identity and expression as they dispel myths and stereotypes. All that, plus Indigenous music from Christina Audas. That's this evening at 6 p.m. here on KSQD 90.7 FM and ksqd.org. Many voices, one station.
And Donald, before in the last few minutes, I'd like to ask what ideas you might have for us to keep doing and stop doing and start doing regarding what we can do to protect ourselves from corporate BS, because our future depends on it. It's just that before we get into that, I did want to ask you a little bit about your book, Privatization of Everything, because that's what I've been seeing with our commons, with our water and our air and even fire departments. So you know more about this than I do. So tell us a little bit about that book, too.
Well, it's 300 pages, so
the Reader's Digest of the Cliff Notes version.
So first off, for you, so the organization I run, In the Public Interest, works on those issues every day, fighting water privatization in prisons and schools and all sorts of stuff. So you can go on our website. There's lots of stuff. So I just mentioned that. I mean, the book is called Privatization of Everything because private interests are getting control of literally everything. Everything from trash to postal services to healthcare to water to schools and so the book covers all those things, but what it does is it adds them up to say this is really fundamentally about democracy.
Yes.
That privatization is an assault on democracy because we lose control over the things that we all need, the public goods that we all need. And we don't just lose control of it. Private interests have captured authority over those things and can make decisions, but they're also extracting and diverting all sorts of resources into profits and dividends and CEO salaries that could be spent on the services that we need. So that's the Cliff Note.
Good. So what would be your message to all of us who want to be more informed and active on these issues?
Well, I think what there's a lot, but in terms of this particular book, Corporate BS, first thing is to recognize it. Here's what we're trying to do is, normally what we'll do is they'll say something and we'll go, no, that's not true, and we debunk it. What we want to do is pre-bunk. You say, wait a second, I heard that before, it's nonsense. Don't let them get out of the gate. So that's the first thing. You hear one of these things, you hear, arguments against the next regulation or the next increase in taxes or whatever it is at any level of government, and say, have I heard that argument before? And then, and you've got the core arguments, and you're going to hear them. You're going to, once you start internalize it, you hear them every day. And then you start talking back and say, I'm not going to debunk you. You said this in 1912. You said it in 1950. You said it in 1960. They're like, we're not going to, we didn't believe it. We shouldn't have believed it then, and we're not going to believe it now. It's just not true. And so, those are the most important things to talk about, I think. Obviously, everyone has to vote, but we have to be smarter about not falling into the trap of having the same fight over and over and over again.
So
the minimum wage has been raised federally. I mean, it happens at the state level, local, but the minimum wage has been raised federally, I think, like 15 times. In Congress, and they have the same fight over and over again. It's been raised in California many times. The same fight over and over again. There's no reason to have the same fight. They were lying then, they're lying now.
So what could we keep doing? I guess it would be to keep aware of the manipulations that are...
Yeah. Identify the stories and say, you said this in 19... we just gave you a toolkit here. We said, you said that... Not your predecessor said that in 1912 or 1906 about what putting labels on food. Right. We want to ridicule. We don't want, like I said, pre-bunk with ridicule.
I love that word, pre-bunk.
Yeah.
And then what can we stop doing? I guess stop falling for the...
Yeah, that's I mean, I assume most of your listeners are activists of some kind, or they're engaged. And
I have active listeners. Yes,
we should keep doing it. We're going into the most political year of our, most consequential political year of our lifetimes next year.
Yes,
and I think we all know what to do about that. Make sure it doesn't go the wrong way.
Yes. Well, I want to go over these quickly again, because I think repetition is good in this case so that people can start seeing it when they're reading, listening to testimony at Congress or whatever. So the 6 propaganda messaging is, first, it's not a problem. So it's not a problem. Then the free market knows best. It's not our fault, it's your fault. It's a job killer. You'll only make it worse, or it's socialism. It seems that there's a component to some of these that, for example, when you were talking about, entire industries could be destroyed or a domestic calamity, that fear is part of this strategy too. Any thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, who wants to go to job killer? Who wants to be responsible for killing jobs? Mm-hmm. Nobody, right? Mm-hmm. And I've seen that argument work at lots of lots of levels of government, local government initiatives and state government. And if you don't know that it's a lie, actually I'll say something else. In all of these arguments, there's a plausibility. There's a patina of plausibility in them. Mm-hmm. They're not only obviously a lie. Well, maybe we don't know that climate change is coming from fossil fuels or cigarette. Maybe we don't. Maybe if you double the minimum wage, maybe we will lose jobs. That's part of their power, and so that's what makes identifying them so important.
Well, I think what you're doing in your pre-bunking and with your book, Corporate BS, is having people take their power back. Take their power back from this messaging. Donald, I want to thank you for being our bold and impressive guest today. Thank you for an hour of your valuable time on Be Bold America. I really appreciate you being here.
Okay, you bet.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for having me.
And to learn more about Donald Cohen, visit inthepublicinterest.com and his book, Corporate BS, Exposing Lies and Half-Truths that Protect Profit, Power, and Wealth in America. And it may be purchased wherever fine books are sold. What's up next on Be Bold America? Well, after the holidays, please join us on Sunday, January 14th, 2024, for Against the Wall and hear the story of a female Border Patrol agent, Jen Budd, turned immigration activist. Jen Budd is the only former U.S. Border Patrol agent to continually blow the whistle on this federal agency's rampant corruption. She challenges us as individuals and as a nation to face the consequences of this agency's activities. Jen's journey offers a vital perspective on the unfolding moral crisis of our time. Hear how a woman in a heavily male-dominated law enforcement agency, a daughter of an alcoholic, a gay woman in a misogynistic, racist, and homophobic environment became determined to fit in, even at the expense of her own moral compass and mental health. So please join Be Bold America on January 14th at 5 p.m. to hear Against the Wall. I want to give a special thank you to today's Be Bold America's program engineer, Eliza James. And before we go, I wanted to say something to you about the holiday season, because I care about you all. And that is they, the autocrats, Putin, Netanyahu, Trump, and others in Congress, have successfully sucked the joy out of this world and this country. They don't know what joy is. They only know money, power, and destruction. But they do know they don't want you to be happy and joyful, because we all get along a little better when we're in these states of mind. It is much easier to divide and conquer us with rage and hate. So it is very important for each of us to be proactive and create our own joy for ourselves and for our family and friends, not just for this holiday season, but all through next year too, because it's going to be a very difficult year for our country to get through. I hope you'll continue to be here, listening to Be Bold America as we go through the year together, discussing challenges to our democracy, our climate, and to our very own principle-centered living. America does not have to be like she is right now. We can make her better, and we can heal her. We have a tremendous opportunity to do so at the 2024 presidential election. The election will be pivotal to America's future. Happy holidays to you all. Create joy for you and yours. Let your smile change the world. Don't let the world change your smile. My name is Jill Cody, and thank you for listening to Be Bold America. Until next time, keep, stop, start,